Hello, this is Jason Schley. Today I'm going to do a how-to video for the Palm Coast Garden Club. They asked me a few months ago if I could do a talk through Skype or through the internet specifically for the garden club, because right now, because of COVID, they aren't meeting. And I said, well, we have a YouTube channel, maybe I could do a how-to for beginners and give you guys the tree, and you could auction or raffle it off, and then I will send the tree directly from here to whoever wins. And she said that was a great idea. They put it for vote, so that's what we're going to do today. We went and scoured the nursery to find some good material that would be fun to do. This is a willow leaf ficus, and we're going to start with its initial styling. We're going to repot it into bonsai soil into this nice Chinese container, and it'll be a nice semi-cascade for whoever wins to have a great little tree to start with. Before I get started, Margie asked me to give the club a little bit of history. I started bonsai in '91, of which I killed a tree pretty quick. I moved down here in '96 and met a fellow by the name of Tom Zane. Tom actually was the current president of Kawa Bonsai Society at the time, and he had actually started the society back in 1978, and he was a huge inspiration for me. He was also the reason why I started the business in '98, wholesaling, and in 2003, retailing. I started in Holly Hill. I was there for 8.5 years. We got to the point at about 6 years where we really outgrew the space, and I started looking for a larger venue. I found 12 acres out here in D-Land, Florida, which is between Orlando and Daytona. It's a beautiful piece of property. It's quiet, it's secluded. You can hear the cicadas in the background, and it was basically a blank palette. We brought our nursery out here, started putting trees in the ground, started making a beautiful botanical garden, a large koi pond, and it's just kind of grew from there. Right now we have 5 employees, and we're open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 5. We have 15,000 plus trees at various stages of development, over 100 different species of trees, and it's really coming into its own. I would say we're one of, if not the biggest bonsai nursery in Central Florida right now. There's a couple more that are down in South Florida that are bigger, and some other states, but we're pretty good size. I mean, we have 4 acres of trees. We do a lot of tropicals. That's one of the things that we focus on. Personally, I like shohin trees, which are trees under 8 inches. However, we have trees that go from 2 inches tall on up to 6 feet tall, all in finished containers, and they all look like trees in various stages of a development. Bonsai trees take time. They don't happen overnight. Real bonsai trees sometimes take decades. I've heard in the past, and some of the books have stated, that a true bonsai, to become a mature tree, takes 20 years from collection and 50 years from seed. So it's a lot of work to do a real bonsai tree. However, it's not about having a finished tree on your bench. It's about the experience. Whether it's growing from seed, collecting from the wild, growing from cuttings. This is a cutting here. Growing from air layers. It's all about the experience. The enjoyment is the whole process, from beginning to end. There's a certain beauty to that whole thing. We are trying to convey different elements of each of that here. We have trees that are finished, that are spectacular, well ramified, good thick branches, good taper, good movement, and we have trees like this that are just getting started. We also have 1,000 seedlings from this year that are this big, and of various varieties that are started, $5 or $7.50. Just something that's about a year old that's ready to get its first styling. So we have a lot here. So that's a little bit about us. This particular tree is a willow leaf ficus, as I said. This is a root cutting from a couple years ago. The wood is probably 4 years old. It was originally just cut and stuck, and it's been in this pot for maybe 4 years actually. It's pretty well rooted. You can see it's got a healthy root system. It actually has an aerial root here. There's a lot of branches that have sprouted. So at this point, it's time to just start its life for bonsai. What we're going to do is decide how we're going to tree. Are we going to have the tree as an upright tree, which could be nice? If that was the case, we probably wouldn't put it in a semi-cascade container. This particular tree, I looked at it. I think it's actually going to be a pretty interesting semi-cascade tree. Not a lot of movement on this trunk, but we'll fix that on the branches and hide it with wire. Could be a really interesting little design. So the first thing you want to do is look at the tree. Try to find where you have the most attractive base or nabari. So what we want to look at is something that has an attractive base, preferably something that flares out evenly, that appears powerful, that looks like it's gripping the soil. If you're going to change the angle, you want the base to appear like it's been that way, not that you just change the angle and it looks like it fell over. It's not what we want with a bonsai. We want it to appear stable in the pot, and it looks like it's been growing that way for a very long time. Everything about a bonsai is an illusion, right? Making the illusion of a powerful tree clasping the ground when in reality it's wired into the pot. It may have, everything about that has been artificially placed with wire, but that's why we use the wire, right? The wire is your paintbrush. We use a lot of different sizes of wire. After I cut this to a line, I'll apply the wire and position the branches. So that's some of the things that we work on. Looking at this tree, there's a nice trunk line right here, but there's a lot of extra branches that I'm not going to use. When we start growing a bonsai tree, we always want to have a tree that forks into twos. As it continues to grow out, it needs to fork. If it grows, like this is a perfect example, and it sprouts into 5 or 6 or 7, like it did on this root cutting, what happens is, over time, this swells, and it becomes very distracting. It's actually it's a pretty good sized flaw. So one of the things I'm going to do is carve this back, so as it continues to grow, it'll callus over, but it won't give you a big bulge there. That's just it's a distraction. Also with this aerial root, a lot of people like aerial roots, but the problem is if that hits the ground and it starts to grow, as it thickens, it'll thicken this area up as well. So I typically don't leave aerial roots on a ficus if I'm trying to create nice elegant taper. The next thing is you want to figure out which one of these branches you're going to keep, and then you eliminate everything that's not going to be used for the design. It'll look really bare at first. It's okay. We're setting the structure for the next few years. And then once these branches continue to grow, you'll cut them back and you'll let them back bud tighter in once they achieve approximate desired thickness. And then you let it grow again, and then you trim it back. So you're always focusing on how to ramify the tree, how to keep it compact, how to make it look like a believable tree. The first time we cut, it's going to be pretty extreme. We'll cut a lot of branches off that we aren't going to keep. It's sprouted in a lot of the same location. We don't want to keep a lot of that. I know which branches I'm keeping. I'm just cleaning it up a lot so I can really see. When I'm looking at the front, this is going to be my front. It's going to lean toward the left. I don't want to have a bulge here, so I'm making sure that when I cut these branches off, that I'm cutting smooth cuts that'll heal over without creating a big bulge. If there is a bulge at this point, I cut it back. looks extreme, but beautiful thing about ficuses is they're very flexible. They're very forgiving. When you're trimming these trees, when you do the first styling, I don't like to take every leaf off if I'm trying to thicken the branches. But I'll trim this back, trim these branches back on the styling, not only so it looks attractive at the end, but also because cutting the tips redistributes a hormone called auxin. And what will happen is cutting these tips will make it back bud. Here and even further back in, now that the sunlight is hitting this and you've trimmed it, that's actually one of the secrets to bonsais. Repeatedly trimming will make it back bud and keep it compact. This is really leggy at this point, but as it back buds and as these branches get to approximately the thickness that I want, I'll cut these back again. Almost all this excessive stuff is temporary. We're just keeping it on there for now for the health of the plant. It can still create photosynthesis. It can still, as it continues to grow, we'll thicken these branches up further, and then we'll be able to cut back and start building taper on the branches. The main tree should have taper. Start at a certain thickness, and as it works its way up, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. As you can see, there's a huge transition from this thickness to this thickness, and then it has almost zero transition up top. In order for that to be remedied down the road, once this gets thicker to be a little bit more believable, here, I'll cut this all the way down, or the new owner will cut it all the way down to continue the taper. Let it grow, and then you cut it back. And then your taper, as you're growing it and cutting it back to new tips, and then letting those grow and cutting them back repeatedly, you get a more believable taper. So it starts at a certain thickness and it gradually gets thinner. That's one of the illusions of a bonsai tree, is that you have that nice taper. It's like, oh, it's been growing that way for you. Well, it's been growing that way because we've artificially created it to look like that. So that's one of the things that we're going to do with this. We're leaving it long. We're going to wire this up. We're going to position these branches, and then we're going to repot it. The wire stays on the tree anywhere from 3 months to a year and a half, 2 years. Depends on the tree, how fast it's growing, how old it is, how good you are at watering it and fertilizing it and growing it. If the mix is really fine, if it's more coarse, all that factors into how fast the tree grows. Really old trees tend to be a little bit more, little slower, not quite as quick to increase on their vigor. Take a little bit longer to develop, especially really old trees. But at that point, usually you're doing a maintenance and just continually improving a finished tree. Whereas a young tree, they take the big cuts pretty easy. Like I said, this tree's wood's probably 4 years old. This thing will just sprout back like nobody's business. In fact, ficuses, as a rule, even the old ficuses, they're easy, crazy vigorous in the tropics. They do very well for bonsai. There's a lot of different sizes of wire that we have here. We have anywhere from 4.5, 4, 3.5, 3, 2.5, 2. This is 2 right here. 1.5, 1. It's all here. But another really great technique when I am, well, what thickness of wire do I want to use? If you hold it out about 3 inches and you hold the branch about 3 inches and you push down, if the branch moves and the wire doesn't, the wire is thick enough to bend the branch. It's an interesting technique. If you're not sure, you say, man, I might be able to go with a thinner wire. Well, try it. Check the thinner size. And if the thinner size bends, whereas the branch doesn't, thinner size won't bend that. So it's something that, it's a good little technique to learn until you get comfortable with what wire takes what. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the wire, 1 wire for 2 branches. This first branch here, which is going to be my cascade branch, and then this apex. I'm going to put 1 piece of wire all the way up. So I didn't talk about it too much, just talking about other things. But when you do large cuts like this, I typically use a pair of concave cutters. I always dip them in Lysol water, 50-50, specifically to kind of sterilize the tool. But then I go back with a sharp blade in this particular instance, I usually use a flex cut, but I also have a real sharp pair of Leatherman that I'll come and I'll finish the edge with it. I don't use cut clay to seal this because ficuses do a really good job of exuding a sap, which kind of seals it on the other hand, but you absolutely can put cut clay or cut paste on those large cuts because these are kind of big cuts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this number 2 wire on both of these branches. I usually measure it and then add a half. This is called the U technique. This is why they call it the U technique, right? I'm going to apply the wire using basically the main trunk as a brace. I'm wiring, this is going clockwise and this is going counterclockwise on the tree. So basically the trunk becomes your brace. You can also, I see a lot of the books, they'll tell you to wrap it at least twice around the trunk, you know, for the bracing, but the U technique kind of helps limit that. As I apply the wire, I apply it at a 60-degree angle from the base of a branch. I also pretend that there's a piece of paper between the branch and the wire. I mean, in reality that's impossible, but just giving you an example how it's just a little bit loose on the branch because the branches are going to grow thicker, they're not going to grow thinner. This is something that you're going to want to do with this tree periodically. Bonsai is wiring, right? Boone said that actually at Brussels, like 2006, he had mentioned that. He said that bonsai is wiring. That's how you refine the trees. So this is the first wire that I've positioned. I haven't bent the tree at all, haven't shaped it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wire some of the sub branches, and I'm going to kind of do the same technique that I did before. I'm going to check the wire, bend it. Oh, this holds, right? I'm going to apply it parallel to the wire that I've already put on. I'm just going to wire it up to the ends. I typically have the wire always facing up. It's the way I was taught. There's a bunch of people that wire differently. It's so funny. You'll have 10 people here that all really know their stuff, have excellent trees, and you see their techniques and they all do it a little different. It's art, right? Everybody has their own little way of doing things, but in order to develop your own style, you have to do it. So if you want to get good at wiring, start wiring. And I know this is a little extreme. A lot of these branches are not going to be permanent. They're going to grow out, and some of them will be cut off, some of them will be replaced, but it's just good practice to wire everything. Even if they're temporary, so what? You wire them. The more you wire, the better you get, more comfortable you get at it. And I'm not a fantastic wirer, but I've been doing it for a long time, so it helps. There's some guys that are just stunning wires. I'm going to wire this one and this one, this one and this one, and then we're pretty much done with this. It's not going to be take too long. Typically use aluminum on tropicals, just they grow so fast. Aluminum usually is about twice the thickness for the same amount of holding power as copper. Because it grows so fast, thicker wire actually takes a little bit longer to dig in than thinner wire. So if you use aluminum, it gives you a little bit more room for error before it starts digging in real deep. So this is pretty much, the wire's kind of loose on it. It's pretty much wired up. This is going to be my front. I'm going to start positioning the branches now. I like to imagine tighter and tighter movement as I work my way out. Now remember, a lot of this is going to be cut off and then replaced, but visually we still want it to appear kind of attractive. So we're going to position these out to like a fan so the sunlight hits the whole thing. Typically do a vertical movement and then horizontal movement on the branches. And if you ever want to see what believable branches look like, look up. It's a great example of what branches should look like. It's really nicely inspirational, right? Just to take a look. I know I sound like a hippie, but I'd love to walk out in the woods and just take a look at the trees. because that's how I get a lot of my ideas on positioning and whatnot. So when you're positioning, you want to make sure that every branch gets its own little place in the sun. If you look down, every branch should be functional for the tree. Even though we want it pretty, the tree don't care about pretty. The tree cares about function. And if for some reason the sunlight isn't hitting a branch, the tree will just eliminate it. If it's shaded out, it'll just drop it. Just like normal trees. Most full-size trees have 0 branches down low. Well, they had them when they started. They just weren't making anything for the tree, so the tree shut them off. So you want to make sure that the branches that you have left on your tree are all functional. Also, what I'm doing is I'm taking any leaves that are facing down, anything that's going straight up, eliminate that too. Specifically because it'll shade out stuff. It'll also, bonsai trees have pads. We try to create pads. Even though certain things will come up and out, you really don't want to have stuff that goes perfectly straight up or perfectly straight down. Straight down, they'd be shaded out with time. So what I've done is just kind of cleaned up the leaves underneath, just so you can kind of see. There is a branch here that probably would be removed, but I'll let you guys decide on which one of those would ultimately be. So that's kind of an idea of how you've started its life for bonsai. This is the very first wiring. You know, it's never been wired or styled before. We cut it back to eliminate a lot of the bulge in here. There's a little bit that you can kind of see it's a little bit better transition. If it starts callousing up, we'll cut it again. This all needs to thicken out, so we leave branches long so they can grow. We're going to get some back budding on here, and that's what we're going to want, preferably closer to the trunk line. And we're just going to let this grow out this year. You'll periodically be thinning it out just to keep the sunlight in there so things don't get shaded out, but you're not going to do a lot of thinning. You want this to kind of thicken up and develop. But this is a cute little tree. I'm going to put it in this pot here, have it with the flat in the front, and I'll show you how to do that next. Okay, here's how we repot. This is the pot that I'm going to put that in. Typically, we always put wires in the holes, not the sole. We'll wash through. What I typically do is the pin technique, the hairpin technique. There's different techniques for sure. You can make a hairpin just like this. Easy way to tell if it fits is you go underneath. See how it fits nice and tight on there? You can also take and you can pinch it. This gets to, everybody has their own little ways. I don't usually bother to do this, but you can absolutely pinch it like that. Right? And then what you'll do is I use galvanized 1/8 inch screening. Put it, and then you just slide it through the bottom so it sticks out the bottom, just like that, and then I fold it in. If it's too long, take your trusty wire cutters and you shorten it. Doesn't need to be that long. What you want to make sure of, especially on a mame or shohin size tree, is that the wire that you used is small enough to where once you set it on a table, it sits flat. If it doesn't sit flat, has a little bit of rock, you use too thick a wire. Thinner wire, this is 1 1/2. Sits flush. If it sits flush. So after you have the wire in, I like to take a piece of 2 or bigger millimeter, slide it into the bottom. That's what I'm going to use to tie in the tree to the pot. Okay? So bonsai trees are usually put in bonsai soil. Our particular mix, I know it looks awfully coarse, but here in Florida when we have 5 months of rain every single day, keeps the roots from getting waterlogged. This particular mix is Twin, Redline, Akadama, Hyuga Pumice, Red Lava, and Black Lava. That's the 4 aggregates that we have, and it's in equal parts. This is the mix that I found works the best here in Florida. There is a ton of mixes. You can talk to 50 different people that know bonsai and you'll get 50 different mixes. This is what works best for me. I've been doing it for over 25 years and I can tell you that this is the best mix that I found. Okay? Some people add a little bit of horticultural charcoal in it, like 5% or less, but that's about the mix that they have. I don't add pine bark in my mix. I found that pine bark starts to break down after a year and you have to repot. You shouldn't have to repot your bonsai unless you're almost full of roots. Not completely full, but almost full of roots to where the drainage starts to get compromised. That should be the only reason why your soil needs to be replaced. It shouldn't be because the mix has gone bad. It should be because you're full of roots. Trees happen. I found with this mix, I only have to repot when it's almost full of roots. That's it. This is not in bonsai soil at this point. This is in pine bark perlite. It's been in this mix for a couple years, 3 years. We're going to take it out of this mix and we're going to not go crazy, but we're going to take the soil off and get it ready for its life in a bonsai pot. It's no longer going to be in any organic mix. You can absolutely take this and wash it off with the hose. If this was a pine or a juniper, I would say no. Those typically, you don't ever bare root. You leave a little bit of soil in there. They seem to decline when you do that. However, with a ficus, you absolutely can take every scrap of soil off. That's okay. What I'm doing here is I'm also going to look at if I have any hidden nabari, anything that's even more attractive in here that I like. We did gain about 1 inch, but we do have a better base under there, which is nice. Remember, it's all about the base. So once you put the soil in, you don't want to crush the soil in and around the roots. You want to kind of gently work it in around the roots so you don't have any large air gaps. First thing you do before you bother with that is you make sure that your front is correct. I don't have this perfectly centered in the pot. I have it a little bit off to the right because the whole tree is coming toward the left. Some of these branches might have been slightly bumped, but you can always readjust them. Looks good. Looks good. I like the angle. I like this is my front. So once I put the soil in and I start positioning, next thing I want to do is take a chopstick or a sharp pointed stick or a piece of, I've seen metal chopsticks, also little tweezers. Take a little pointed tweezers. I have a little pair here. You can work it lightly in and around the roots. You don't want to beat it up. You're just trying to work it in there so you don't have any large air gaps. Because what will happen is you'll get, if you don't do this and you have a large air gap, the tree will appear fine until one day, usually after some sort of stress or trauma, whether it's a ton of rain or a real hot day, whole sections of the tree will die. Like, what happened? That's weird. You pull it out of the pot and you have this gap that the soil has settled and you have this big air gap. So what happened was you had a bunch of rain or you're taking good care of it and the roots were growing in that air gap and then it got dry and it got a little dry and that whole area where the air gap dried out differently than the rest of the soil. And then what happens is those roots die, and then when those roots die, the tree goes into stress, maybe the whole top of the tree dies, depending on the species. Then you have a problem. So it's always good to be thorough and prep the soil every time you repot. Take the time, chopstick it. You also want to make sure you have a little bit of an edge, so when you water, you're not washing the soil out. A lot of tweezers have a little flat section in the back. You can use it to tamp in the soil along the edge, so when you water, the soil doesn't wash away. I'll water this until the water drains out freely clear, and then I'll put it in a shady spot for about a week. When I start seeing some fresh growth on there, I'll move it out into full sun. I'll start fertilizing it about a month from repotting. So in 1 month, we'll put some baskets in here with fertilizer. You can either use organic or you can use chemical. I like to use organic on anything that's a more refined tree, something that's more finished, that you're trying to ramify, trying to get the leaves tighter, trying to get the internodes tighter. The organic is really nice because you get this slow, constant feed. It makes the plant healthy and tough, but you don't get this excessive growth that you do with chemical fertilizer. If you have a young tree and you're trying to develop it as fast as possible, or you don't have the wherewithal or the time to fertilize every single month, you put chemical fertilizer on there, like a granule that you do every 2 or 3 months. You just gotta make sure you put it on your calendar so you don't forget. We use a product here called Sun Coat. There's also a product called Davidson's, which people will use. There's also a liquid called Dynagrow, which works. The problem with Dynagrow is it's liquid, so you have to apply it much more often than you would a granule. Every 2 weeks, typically, you'd put the Dynagrow on. So this is the front of the tree. You can kind of see that we've started its life with layers. It has a few years to go, but it's just the very start. It's a nice little tree, future little tree that'll be better and better over the years. Eventually, it's going to have an apex right here, have a nice little crown, multiple branches which will create a rounded crown, not an apex like it has now. And all these will be ramified out. You'll have them typically where the branch first comes out and forks into two. The next fork will be half that distance, and the next fork will be half that distance, the next fork will be half that distance. Until you get comfortable, always think of that, of forking to twos and halves. Once you get really comfortable with bonsai, you can make it your own, but until then, just follow some of the guidelines and follow them. Now, I'm going to show you real quick before we're done another tree that is a much older trunk, but has been wired and shaped repeatedly for about 5 times in the last 4 years. I'm going to show you what letting it grow out, cutting it back, and letting it grow out can kind of achieve. The tree that I'm about to show you is actually still a few years away, but I just want to kind of go over what we discussed today and to show you the techniques that we're utilizing. So real quick, this particular tree has been grown and cut back for a lot longer than I've had it. But I got this tree from a friend who had bought it from a collection 3 years ago. This tree hadn't been worked in a long time, probably 7-8 years. We actually had taken 75% of it or 80% of it off and wired this main trunk up and this main trunk over here up. So it's just kind of goes to show you how quick you can develop a tree by letting the tree grow. This ended up going like 2.5, 3 feet, and then we cut it down, and then we let it grow and we cut it down. Now at this point we are defoliating it because we're trying to create more ramification. The main branches are thickened because we've let them grow and unrestricted. And then we've cut it back, and then we let it grow, and then we cut it back, and then we let it grow, and then we cut it. And every time we cut it back, we're cutting it back for 2. See how this forks into, this goes from 1 to 2. These are 4, then 8. This is 4, then 8, then 16. So this is how you start building your structure on your tree. This tree, in another 4 or 5 years of repeatedly doing that, the leaves will get smaller, the ramification will get more delicate, and the tree will start looking like a really nicely refined tree. At this point, you're going to use just organic fertilizer. You don't want to use chemical fertilizer on that. Also, the mix will start getting more fine, because when you get a finer mix, you're going to get finer roots. What happens down below happens up top. The roots will be finer, and the branches will become finer. We'll also have to pay more attention to watering, because with a finer mix, it can stay wet longer, stay too wet, so you have to hand water. It's a little bit higher maintenance, but that's bonsai. That's how you do it. So this is just a good example of the very first styling and about the 5th styling, and it's still, like I said, years away from becoming a tree that we would show off. So just to reiterate, last time, first thing we look at when we want to pick a bonsai tree to start, like a nice little starter, the first thing is the nabari. This has got a nice little base. Look at this nabari. It's a nice nabari. Second thing is the trunk line. See the trunk line on this? Very attractive trunk line. Third thing is the branching. If it doesn't have the branching, you put the branching on there, or you redesign the branching. That's bonsai. Start developing a taper on your branches. Start developing ramifications. Start developing a crown. Make it look like a tree. Don't be afraid to trim this. As it's growing, you'll let those grow to thicken these branches, but you'll periodically trim them back, specifically to make closer branches and to make it more refined. It's a constant process. I'm going to water this until it comes out clear. We'll put this in the shade for a week. By that time, you guys will have started your voting. And this is going to go priority mail. Shipping's already been paid for. We're going to wrap this in bubble wrap. We're going to wrap this with the plastic, and then we'll put bubble wrap, and then we'll put peanuts on here. Whoever wins this, when you get it, take it out, put it in a shady spot for a day or two, and then move it right out in the full sun. Don't let this freeze. Anything below 40, you bring it in for the night. These always do better outdoors. Always. If you're going to have to grow it indoors, southern, eastern, or western window is best, ideally under lights. It's going to be touchier indoors. Outdoors is always best. Full sun is ideal. That's where you get the leaves tiny. That's where you get the inner nodes tight. Water it every day, and you water it till it drains out. When the temperature starts dropping down to the 70s, maybe you're doing it every other day. Check the tree. If the soil is starting to dry out, water it. If it's not, if it's still moist on the surface, wait a day. Let the tree tell you when it needs to be watered again. You can see this right here needs to be watered. Both of these are pretty dry. This one has never been watered, and this one has been watered in a day. So it's time to water it. Okay, just keep that in mind. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment on this YouTube video, or you can shoot me an email at schleysbonsai@gmail.com. That's schleysbonsai@gmail.com. All right, good luck, guys, and hopefully this will be fun for the club. Talk to you soon.